Hey folks, Green Stuff Gav here. This week we've come back to another video about Inquisitor, following on from the introduction last time. This time I thought we'd have a quick look at how I go about character creation. Because obviously a big question a lot of people have is, how do I make a character? And Inquisitor has a, that's the official character sheet. There's all this information on here that can look a bit daunting, but it's quite straightforward. Now, there was a bit of an issue with the rulebook itself with the characters. For example, here is the Inquisitor page, which got a bit of background, and then what sort of equipment the characters have, abilities they all come with, and then sample stat lines. Now, these stat lines are very overpowered, and I object to having to roll your stat lines, because the key thing for Inquisitor is it is a narrative game. You should be writing your stats to match the character. So a big part of Inquisitor is coming up with the character concept. Who is this character? What would you like to play? And there are some community-driven, not guidelines, but averages that are picked up on for Inquisitors. So, for example, Witch Hunter Tyrus has a weapon skill of 98, which is remarkable. Inquisitor works on a D100 system, and you effectively have to roll underneath your statistic to hit. So, if your ballistic skill is 65 or less, you hit. And there's all sorts of modifiers, but that's we'll find out more about that when we discuss the actual rule set. But one of the community-driven things is, and I always recommend to people, is obviously if we're playing Inquisitor, we are telling a story. So to have these remarkably high-powered stat lines isn't very fun, because with a weapon skill 95, this guy's always going to hit in combat. Which takes out a lot of the randomness, and it's detrimental to the game, because no one wants to end up facing a character who will automatically shoot you every turn. So generally, a good guideline, well, we'll talk about the stats first. So the stats are very similar to other Games Workshop games. And we have a weapon skill, a ballistic skill. Weapon skill is used to hit people in combat. Ballistic skill to shoot people. Strength, how strong a character is. Toughness, how tough a character is. Initiative is all to do with awareness and a character's reflexes and things like that. Willpower is used mostly by psychers, but also demonstrates how strong-willed a character is. Sagacity is knowledge, a very old word for knowledge. Nerve, how likely is this character to react to being shot? And leadership, which is very similar to other games, is how well can this person influence other people. Now, a good guideline is your average person on the street has statistics of 30-ish. Those who've had some training can be anywhere between 30 and 60-ish. People who have practiced can have stats in the 70s, and anyone who's an absolute master is likely to be in the 80s. 100 is the maximum for any stat. So if a person is in the absolute perfect condition, they would and perfectly trained, they would have a ballistic skill of 100, would never miss, always hit, like bullseye from Daredevil. But as I said, the key thing to writing your character sheet is to come up with a character who's interesting. So we'll come back to the blank template. Here's a couple of sample characters. So this is a Adeptus Mechanicus character, Magos Stein, who is all bionic. Mass Mechadendrites, he is 90% bionic. So he's got a high weapon skill just for flailing tentacles. Pretty good ballistic skill, some targeting arrays. High strength because bionics. Medium toughness because it doesn't matter if you're bionic or not, you get shot, it hurts. Midpoint initiative, quite strong-willed because Mechanicus, he's a Magos in the Mechanicus. And again, a remarkably high sagacity because he's an Adeptus Mechanicus Magos. And same with Nerve. So Nerve is quite high because been there, done that. But leadership is midpoint because it's a Magos. People get unnerved. Whereas I've written an Inquisitor, who's very bombastic Inquisitor, has got high weapon skill. Okay, ballistic skill. He doesn't go for shooting, but he can still shoot. You see, very similar in the stat lines, but a lot higher nerve because this guy's an Inquisitor. He knows he is the voice of the Emperor. So it's all about writing stats that are appropriate. So it's very easy to go for remarkably high stats, and the Games Workshop sample characters are remarkably high stats. But that isn't always an interesting game to play, so it's always worth coming up with your character first and then writing the stats to fit. So, for example, Dionzi, I created a figure while playing with Mesh Mixer, and Dionzi printed it for me. So I thought we'd sit down and we'd write a character sheet for this Inquisitor model. So, quite obviously from the miniature herself, she's got a great big axe. So she's going to be more likely focused on the melee side of things. So being an Inquisitor, I'd probably look at the 60s, maybe the high 60s, I think. Maybe 70. So we'll go for 70. Now she doesn't have any ranged weapons, but she's still an Inquisitor. She can fire a gun if she needed to. So we go slightly less because it's not her focus. So we'll go for like a 66. By the looks of her, she's no bionics there. She is a normal person, but quite well toned, quite well muscled. So you, again, if an average person on the street is 30, 40, I think we can easily go for maybe 59. And again, so although she's toned, there's not a massive bulk of muscle there, so her toughness is probably going to be about the same. Again, depending on bionics and things like that. Now, initiative is interesting because that also affects where you are activating the turn order. So a high initiative character will go before anyone else, and that represents their the way they can react to things. You know, they can just split decision, decide what they need to do. So I'm going to go for mid-range in 65 because that's high enough that to make her speed 4, but not high enough that, you know, some faster characters will go before she does. Again, being an Inquisitor will give her a high willpower. She knows what she needs to do. Go for a 70. And quite a bookish looking character. She's not savant by all means, but I would imagine we'd probably have a sagacity in the 60s. We're going to go for a high nerve as well because that's if you're going to go onto a battlefield wearing a poly suit, not a lot of armor, then you've got to be quite sure of yourself. And we'll go for a high leadership as well because I imagine if a lady like this stomps up to you, then you're not going to tell her no with a great big power axe. And that is as easy as, that's all you need to do. An often commented thing with Inquisitor is there's no balancing. There was a ready reckoner in the rulebook, but it was pretty terrible. It didn't really work and wasn't appropriate. So I don't think I've ever met anyone that uses the ready reckoner. Now the fun part of an Inquisitor character, so stats are quite straightforward, is what are they armed with? Now we know we've got a power axe in there, so we'll just add a power axe. And you've got special abilities and psychic powers. What sort of fighter are you dealing with here? And there are several skills in the rulebook, but it's always interesting to write skills according to the character. Don't think, oh, this skill in the rulebook is really cool, is really good. You should instead be picking skills that make sense for the character. So, for example, here for my Magus, he's got ambidextrous because he hasn't actually got any arms. He's just got mass mechadendrites. But what's mass mechadendrites? Well, I've actually written specific rules. So because this guy is mainly mechadendrite, he adds 20% to his sagacity when taking tests with interacting with machinery. Counts as a flail and power fist, and gives him machine empathy and dodge, because he is just a massive mechadendrite. Machine empathy is a psychic power technically, but because this is a Magus and he's connecting with machinery, I can't use machine empathy psychic power. So, you know, Man of Steel, 90% of his body with bionics. So most implants covered in his profile, gives him an arm value to all locations, a bonus to get resistant gas, toxin, and photon flash. So this is where you take multiple skills and put them together to have a reason for taking them. And this is where, like I say, it's very easy to sit down with the rulebook and just pick a load of skills out. But I would recommend just a few skills, and pick ones that are suitable for the character. Don't just take a skill because it's a very good skill. For example, lightning reflex allows you to change your declared actions, but you'd need to make sure you had a character that could justify having that ability. So, obviously, ranged weapons, melee weapons, any unusual equipment. And this is a damage chart. This is used in game and we'll discuss what this does. But this also has armor values. So you need to bear in mind any armor because that comes off damage you receive. So his head's got 3 armor plates and it's 6 to all locations because he's made of mechadendrites. There's a few other bits and pieces here that are quite important. Knockback is your strength divided by 10. So strength 70. Strength 73 gives him a knockback of 7. If he takes up to 7 points, not a problem. If he takes more than 7 points, you get knocked over. Your base injury value, which is your toughness divided by 10, so 6 in this case, every 6 points will fill a box on the damage sheet. We'll come into what they do in the game itself, but that's an important one. And the system shock, which is your toughness divided by 5, is how many points of damage you take before you take a test to see if your character passes out, goes into shock. This is slightly different from consciousness, which is your toughness by 2, is when you hit your consciousness value, your character is unconscious and takes no further part in the game, because your injury total stacks across the game unless you heal it. So, I mean, like I say, so if we we go back to some of the actual characters, we will ignore the fact that the stat lines are remarkable. So Slick Devlin is a gunfighter with a ballistic skill 70. Means she's almost a perfect shot. But we can see he's got equipment of a stubber with a reload, revolver with 18 shots, 3 man-stopper shots for it, flak armor, and a knife. But he's got ambidextrous, fire a gun in each hand. Fast draw means he can draw his weapons as he moves. Gunfighter, he can fire both guns at once. Hip shooting, he can run and shoot. Lightning reflexes allows him to change his actions, and quick mode. So that's a lot of skills. Some of these characters are like Cherubale, demonic invulnerable, possessed, vampirism. He's got 4 different effects when he hits people in combat, and he's got 5 different psychic powers. But his stat line is all 50. So it is willpower. Nerve. Wow. So, you know, there's unfortunately all of the characters are all a bit hit and miss, and like I say, the Inquisitors themselves are remarkably overpowered. There you go. So this is Eisenhorn at the end of his life, or his older age. You know, very high weapon skill, ballistic skill. Pretty mid-lines for that, but willpower 92 is remarkably high. Sagacity 91, he knows everything. So yeah, they are slightly over the top. But this is one of the things that the experience in the game will teach you what is suitable and what is fun. I mean, as I said earlier, is like having a character that does everything is just boring. It's not fun to play with, it's not fun to play against. I recommend erring on being more restrained with character creation, so that you can play the game and enjoy the game for itself. So that's a quick rundown of how Inquisitor stats and that work. I'm hoping for the next video in the series we'll actually be able to get some figures out, and I'll explain how the turn works. And then after that, if we have time, we'll do some sample turns and lead up to a battle report. So, as always, thanks for watching and have fun.